That Civic is embarrassing the whole family. That sentence, in the middle of the Riverside Country Club parking lot. It was packed with people, and me, I just stood there, staring at the car keys in my hand. Not even 30 seconds later, my brother, Tyler, raised his voice so loud that a few people pouring champagne outside turned to look. Mom put her hand over her face, and my sister-in-law Lila curled her lip, making no attempt to hide her contempt. I could feel my cheeks burning, like someone had just slapped me in broad daylight. My car is a 2015 Honda Civic. No, it's not rusting, like Tyler says. I take good care of it. New tires, engine still runs smoothly. It's simple, yes, but it's mine. I bought it myself with the money I earned. No loans, no using someone's name. But to my family, it's a stain. Around here, it's all Mercedes, Porsches, flashy vanity plates, and clouds of luxury perfume wafting from the ants walking by. Tyler looked at me and delivered his verdict. You're 32, Rae. At your age, I had a penthouse and a Tesla. I pressed my lips together, eyes down on the concrete floor. The leather shoes I wore were the cheap kind. My simple linen dress was not polished enough to register in my mother's eyes. I knew, I've always known. That event was our family's annual gathering. My family treats it like a ritual. Everyone shows up at the country club to flaunt their achievements. Dad was already waiting at the entrance. Checking his watch like my being late was a personal insult to him. Rae, you're late again. Don't tell me it's because of some charity project thing. Before I could answer, Lila cut in. She's teaching kids how to use keyboards. Cute, huh? Her voice dripping honey and poison. I kept my composure. I'm helping rural schools with technology training. Dad, that's not a job. Rae, Mom. Her voice was sharp as a blade. It's a phase. You're 32, not 20. I sat down at the table. Around me were the kinds of families my family considers proper: a mayor, a doctor, a lawyer, an investor, and me, in their eyes, just a poor little keyboard teacher. Where do you live again? My cousin Victoria asked, with a polite but strained smile. Elmbrook. Oh my God, that starter home neighborhood. I nodded. I bought that house with cash, not a single loan. But they didn't care. To them, everything I had would never be enough. When it was time to leave, I walked out ahead. I heard Tyler's voice behind me, laced with frustration. At least promise me this. Ditch the car, for God's sake. Rae, get a real one. Then he pointed at my Civic, like it was some kind of virus contaminating the family name. I stood there, my throat tightening, not because I was ashamed of my car, but because they had never once asked what I was really doing. They had never listened, never been curious. Never truly looked at me, Rae Williams, the woman who had spent 8 years quietly building something that would make every single one of them bow their heads. If they knew, but should I let them see, or let them stumble onto the truth themselves? With those same judgmental eyes, I decided to let them follow me and see for themselves. The question was, would they even open their eyes? I drove home in silence, no radio, no podcast, just the steady hum of the engine, and a single sentence looping in my head. That Civic is embarrassing the whole family. I turned onto the familiar street in Millbrook, stopped in front of the White House with the sea blue porch I bought 4 years ago. The house I paid for in cash. But tonight, looking at it, I didn't feel proud anymore. I only felt like a thorn in the side of my own flesh and blood. I walked into the kitchen, didn't turn on the light, didn't take off my shoes. Just stood there frozen, my arms hanging limply at my sides. The air inside felt colder than usual. Or maybe it was just me. I opened the fridge and poured a glass of water. When the glass touched my lips, my hand trembled slightly. I remembered the way my mother looked at me before leaving the country club. No hug. No, I understand. Just that look. As if her daughter was an unfixable disappointment. Rae, you're wasting your youth. That sentence was like a cut, no blood. But it sank deep. Mom, I'm not asking you to agree with every choice I make. I just wish you would believe that my life isn't meaningless, that the kids from poor neighborhoods who touched a keyboard for the very first time got that chance because of me. The educational software I built is now in 23 states. I don't need you to cry out of pride. I just need you to stop being silent. Because sometimes silence hurts more than criticism. I sat down at the table. My laptop had been open since morning, and the financial report was unsaved. $67 million in revenue, $31 million in net profit. Thousands of students logging in to learn every single day. I stared at those numbers, not to boast, but to remind myself, I am not useless. But why can't you see that? Why does the whole family only see the girl who does charity and not the CEO of a digital education ecosystem? I tried to remember the last time you asked me, "Are you okay?" Not "How much do you make?" Not "When are you getting a new car?" Just simply, "Are you okay?" I can't remember. When I was little, I used to think if I studied hard and behaved well, you would be proud, that achievements could take the place of love, that perfect grades could buy a warm smile. And so I tried and kept trying. Now I have my own company. I support myself. I owe nothing to anyone. I give back to society. But in your eyes, I'm still a failure in a linen dress driving an old Civic. Mom, I don't need your praise. I just need you to listen. I stood up, walked to the window. I looked at the car sitting under the tree's shadow, as if waiting for comfort. It had carried me to every teaching gig, every pitch meeting, every conference. It doesn't deserve to be looked down on just like me. I placed my hand over my chest. I'm still breathing, still living. And I will keep going, not to prove anything to my family, but to keep the promise I made to those kids out there. I won't give up. I'll keep opening doors for you. The question is, will my mother ever look at me the way she once did? Or do I have to accept that, in her eyes, I was never enough? If you've ever lived your life longing for recognition, but never once felt truly heard, you are not alone. Subscribe to Revenge. Mark so together, we can rewrite the meaning of success and justice. The next morning, I woke up with my eyes still heavy. Coffee brewed from the automatic pot. That familiar bitter smell rose up, but it couldn't drown out the feeling swelling in my chest. Anger. It was no longer just sadness, no longer just the loneliness in a cold kitchen. It was something else, deeper, sharper, like a blade, quiet, alive. I checked my phone, a message from my mother. Rae, today, maybe send your resume to Aunt Helena's media company. She can help you get an office job, more stable. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I was too tired to explain that I didn't need to apply for a job anywhere. I was running a company, an empire, a system, but to them, I was still just the failure who hadn't settled down. I typed emails, responded to a string of pending contracts, scheduled a demo with the Harvard team. Everything still ran as usual, except I no longer felt the peace I used to. That afternoon, I received a letter from the bank. Not mine, my parents. They were still using the old linked account to receive the family trust statements. I glanced through the transactions. A dinner at the Riverside Club, $3,200. Paid by Tyler. Supplementary card, in my name. I froze. I had canceled all supplementary cards 3 months ago. Then I flipped a few more pages. Aspen Resort, booking $11,000. Dior bag, $5,800. VIP golf course registration, $7,300. All of it charged to a supplementary card that shouldn't even exist. I called the bank. After 17 minutes on hold, a representative said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. It appears the card was reactivated with a signed authorization from your mother." I stood there, stunned, and in that moment, I understood. They didn't just look down on me. They were exploiting me. Everything exploded. I opened my laptop, pulled up every report, cross-checked every expense, reviewed every internal transfer I had ever set to automatic. Each number felt like a punch to the heart. Tyler, Victoria, even my mother. I had paid for far too many things, and they never once called with two simple words, "Thank you." And then I looked at myself in the mirror, a tired face, dark circles under my eyes, but my gaze sharper than ever, because finally I was awake. I would no longer ask for anyone's approval. I would no longer wait for them to understand me. I would make them see. I grabbed my phone and called Rachel, our company's head of legal. I need a full audit of all off-contract expenses from the linked accounts. Also, every single family member's access to the bank accounts should be cut. No exceptions. That night, I opened a new file on my computer. I named it Millbrook Plan, not for petty revenge, but for a complete severing. Every card, every allowance, every privilege they enjoyed under my name, I would cut. Every single one. And this time, it wasn't because I was angry. It was because I was strong enough to stop being used. But how will they react when they realize the money pipeline they've been draining for so long has just been shut off by me? I started with the small things, revoking my mother's access to my bank accounts, canceling the automatic payments for Tyler's health insurance, switching the company phone number over to two-factor authentication, tied to my personal email, and no longer using the shared family server. No one noticed, because I did it all in silence, but each action was like laying one brick after another to build a wall that, this time, I was standing inside of. Every morning, I got up at 5, not to meditate, not to do yoga, but to learn. I sat in front of my large screen, pulling up investment reports. I read every line in the M&A memos that I used to ignore because they were unrelated to the education sector. Now they were relevant. I needed to understand finance from the perspective of someone in control, not someone being controlled. I began relearning the entire digital supply chain. I called Ethan, a former advisor who had worked at Microsoft, for guidance on restructuring our internal data and tightening our security systems. I also changed my appearance, not because I wanted to look prettier, but because I wanted to match the strength I felt inside. I let go of the simple high ponytail, switching to a sharp, straight bob. I traded my cotton dresses for tailored charcoal gray suits, not designer labels, but with fabric and craftsmanship that made anyone who looked twice take a second look. One Thursday morning, I saw myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because I was different, but because I had stopped bowing my head. Inside the company, I began making changes. Digital learning dynamics was still running smoothly, but I knew if I wanted it to go further, I had to be decisive. I cut an entire department dedicated to external PR because I no longer needed polishing. I created a new internal strategy unit, naming it Project Phoenix. The goal is to expand our system into 3 new markets, including the government and the military. Sounds ambitious. It was. But after sitting through meetings where they once called me the keyboard teacher, nothing felt impossible anymore. One afternoon, while I was reviewing reports, Rachel, the head of legal, sent me a file. These are all the financial transactions related to your family members over the past 7 years. I opened it. My eyes stopped at one line. Non-repayable investment for Tyler Monroe, LLC, $200,000. I remembered. It was the money I wired when he promised to start an independent film production company. Never paid back, no contract, not even a thank you. Right below it are the construction costs for the Victoria Monroe Boutique showroom, $150,000. I felt my throat tighten. I used to think I did those things out of love, but in reality, I was buying acceptance. And now I knew they never intended to give it to me. I sat there in silence for several minutes. Then I stood up, left the house, drove to the boutique I had funded for Victoria. I didn't go inside. I just stood across the street, watching her beam at a customer. surrounded by the gleaming wood-paneled walls I had paid to build. I turned away. No photos, no recordings, no need for proof, because what I was about to do wasn't about winning an argument. It was about cutting the vein they had been bleeding me through for years. That night, I opened my Millbrook plan again. I added a new line. Next step, redefine myself. I was no longer Rae in a linen dress, driving a Civic. I was the woman who had built an entire educational ecosystem for tens of thousands of children across the United States. I was the only one in this family capable of creating value without begging. But could I take back every privilege they were living on without triggering a hurricane? The answer, I wasn't sure yet. But one thing I knew more clearly than ever, I was ready. Monday morning, 7:03 a.m., I walked into the downtown office, the 12th floor of a glass building overlooking the city park. Sunlight streamed through the double-pane windows, falling across my face, but inside, I was cold as steel. The conference room was already occupied. Rachel, legal; Luis, budget manager; June, the new CEO I had hired just 2 weeks ago, the only outsider with no ties to my family. I sat down and placed a file folder in front of me. No opening remarks, no theatrics. I simply gestured toward Rachel. Let's start with the funding for Victoria Monroe Boutique. Rachel nodded. She pulled up the first slide, a detailed spreadsheet showing transfers straight from Digital Learning Dynamics Internal Fund into a personal account under Victoria Monroe's name. No contract, no repayment, no audit trail. I looked directly at Luis. Were you aware of this? He fumbled. I thought it was some kind of CSR program, approved by you directly. I nodded. It used to be, but from now on, we're restructuring the entire financial system. No under-the-table funding will be accepted without a clear legal contract. The meeting lasted only 28 minutes. When I left, I said nothing more. I let my actions speak. And that afternoon, I sent my first email to Victoria Monroe subject update regarding fashion boutique funding. Dear Victoria, following a recent internal review, I've found that the funding from Digital Learning Dynamics to Monroe Boutique has not been handled in accordance with current accounting standards. To ensure transparency and legal compliance, we request full invoices and spending records from the first fiscal year to the present, confirmation of a repayment plan, or the signing of a formal agreement to convert the funding into an equity stake. Deadline 10 days. If we do not receive a response, we will proceed with the necessary legal steps to recover the allocated funds. Sincerely, Rae Williams. I reread every line before hitting send. My hand didn't shake. I felt one thing, clearly, light. Like I had just set down the first heavy stone from my back. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed. Victoria. I didn't pick up. 12 text messages, 3 missed calls, 1 email. Rae, are you serious? You think this is how you treat your own sister? I didn't reply. That night, I sat alone on the porch, a mug of ginger tea in my hands, the glow of a street lamp across the road. No big victory today, but I knew this was the starting point. 3 days later, Tyler called. He didn't waste time. Why did you revoke Mom's access to her account? She's worried, thought something happened to you. I paused for a few seconds, then spoke slowly. Because she reactivated her secondary card without asking me. He went silent. I continued. And because I've covered more than $400,000 of your expenses from my personal funds, and I've never seen a single dollar repaid. Rae, that's because you told me I could. You said I was family. Yes, but today, things are different. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg anyone to understand. I just stopped. And that act of stopping was enough to make the system they had been living in begin to crack. I didn't need to fight back with words. I only had to take back the power I'd given away far too easily. The question now was, once I take the wheel of my own life back, who will be the first to break? I thought I had prepared myself mentally. I thought that when I cut off their financial support, they'd be angry. Maybe they'd blame me. At worst, they'd give me the silent treatment for a few weeks and then move on. But I was wrong. 3 days after my phone call with Tyler, I received an urgent summons from the Auxiliary Board of Directors, a group of 3 family members I had once invited to serve as honorary advisors for digital learning dynamics. I never imagined they'd use it against me. The meeting was held at the offices of Monroe and Pierce Law, where my uncle, Richard Monroe, is a founding partner. I went alone. No Rachel, no legal counsel. I wanted to look them straight in the eye and hear the words I had only been guessing at until now. The conference room was paneled in dark wood. The air conditioning was cold. On the table, bottled water, printed documents, and 3 familiar faces, now more distant than ever. Richard, my uncle. Tyler's face froze stiff, and my mother. I sat down. Said nothing, waited for them to start. Richard spoke first. Rae, I'm afraid you've been making some rash decisions that are jeopardizing overall stability. I lifted my head. What stability? Tyler cut in, cutting off Mom's account, sending Victoria that letter, demanding she return her investment. What do you think you're doing? I didn't answer that question. Instead, I shot one back. Do you ever think about how I feel, seeing my name being used to pay for Dior handbags, VIP golf memberships, and Aspen plane tickets? No one responded. Only my mother spoke softly. Could we talk alone for a moment? I nodded. We stepped out into the hallway. She stood there, clutching her purse, like she was holding together something that would shatter if she let go. You're making a big deal out of nothing. This is all a misunderstanding. I just wanted to help Tyler and Victoria get settled. Family's supposed to support each other. I looked at her. I've been supporting them, Mom, for almost 10 years, without a single question, without a single condition. But now I can't anymore. She lifted her gaze to me, her eyes flickering with hurt. You're tearing this family apart. I swallowed hard. No, I'm just taking back what's mine. That night, I came home late. Just as I turned off the car, a text came in. It was from Rachel. Rae, we've got a problem. Several third-party investors just pulled out of Project Phoenix. They said they don't want to get caught up in a family dispute. I froze. Clearly, someone had started leaking information. I powered up my laptop and checked my email. A finance reporter from the local business magazine had sent me an interview request. We've heard digital learning dynamics is undergoing restructuring due to internal family conflict. I sank into my chair. It felt like I was losing control. Everything I had tried to keep under wraps was now being dragged into the open wrongly, and at the worst possible time. I started typing a message to Rachel to call an emergency meeting, but my fingers stopped halfway. I remembered my mother's eyes. Her words, "You're tearing this family apart." They echoed in my head, and in that moment, I suddenly felt alone. I didn't know who was truly on my side. I didn't know who in the company I could trust, who had leaked the information, who thought they were doing the right thing for the family by stabbing me in the back a minute later. I locked my phone, stepped out into the backyard. There was no moon that night, only the warm yellow glow spilled from the kitchen window and the sound of wind rattling the eaves. I wondered, if I keep going, what will I have left, family, the company, or just an empty shell of myself sitting among a pile of cold victories? But then, my eyes drifted toward my office window. That's where kids all over America were waiting for me to release the next software update. That's where I had built something entirely on my own, with everything I had. And I knew, no matter what I lose, I cannot lose that. If you've ever fought to take back what's yours, only to be called the destroyer, you're not alone. Subscribe to Revenge. Mark so you can follow Rae's journey as she stands firm through backlash and isolation. Monday morning, 7:21 a.m. I stood by the glass window, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. My heart was still beating steadily. But something felt different. A feeling, like right before a storm. So still, it was suffocating. At 8:00, the meeting began. This time, every senior executive was present. No one was absent. Rachel walked in first, holding a printed document. Her face couldn't hide the tension, but her eyes were still steady. "We've found the leak, Rae." I turned my head, set the coffee cup down on the table, and said just one word, "Who?" Rachel held the file up in front of me, an internal memo, and in the sender's field, it was David Pierce, the communications director, and also Victoria's ex-boyfriend. I nodded. The answer had never been clearer. That was when I realized my family hadn't just taken my money. They had planted someone right inside my own ranks. I didn't wait long. Less than 24 hours later, David received an immediate termination notice. No severance, no negotiation. All email and server access were locked on the spot. Security escorted him out of the building. 2 days later, I held a surprise press conference. No prior announcement, no press invites blasted to the media, just a single invitation sent to Forbes magazine. At the event, I announced Digital Learning Dynamics was officially expanding into the government and military sectors, with 3 pilot contracts already signed. Initial value $12 million. Projected value unlimited. The entire room erupted. No one was asking about family drama anymore. No one was second-guessing internal affairs. Every spotlight was now on capability, on strategy, on results. And for the first time in months, I was being looked at with recognition, not pity, no doubt. That day, my phone blew up. Dad called. I didn't answer. Mom texted, "If you need anything, just say it. Let's not hurt each other any more than this." Victoria. Did you really have to go this far? I didn't respond to any of them. I drove home close to midnight. On my desk was a brown envelope that no one knew I had received. It was from my grandfather. He was no longer alive, but he had left me a handwritten letter from when I was 17. A letter my mother had kept locked in a safe all these years. Now, she sent it back to me. I opened it. "Rae, if one day you find yourself standing alone in the middle of a storm, remember, storms are also the Earth's way of clearing out the trash. Steady your heart. Don't let your hand tremble, because you might be clearing the path for an entire generation after you." I set the letter down, my chest swelling with something I couldn't quite name. Not exactly tears, not exactly pride, but the feeling of being seen, being understood, even if it came late, even if there was no one left to hold me. I turned toward my screen. A notification popped up. The Phoenix Project had just received its next round of funding. $8 million. A win. Clear. Decisive. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of work, not because of stress, but because the one person I wanted to share this with was my mother, and she had only sent one line. "If you and your sister have done something wrong, I'm sorry, but what you're doing is cruel." I stared at those words glowing quietly on the screen. Didn't reply. Just marked it as read. I had won, but I had lost something that I wasn't sure I could ever get back. The question was, when the losses start to take shape, will I still have the strength to keep going? Thursday morning, I was about to sign the 3rd contract with the Florida Department of Education when my phone rang. "Rachel." I picked up as I was walking down the stairs. "Rae, we have a serious problem." I froze mid-step, my iPad suspended in midair. "Talk to me." An anonymous complaint had been sent to 3 agencies at the same time: the Federal Audit Commission, the Internal Reporting System of the National Banking Network, and the IRS. The accusation that Digital Learning Dynamics was laundering money through affiliated charities, including the Future Minds Foundation and the Technology Access Alliance. My stomach twisted. Not because I was scared. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. But because I knew exactly who could weave a story so intricate, so convincing, that federal agencies would believe it. I said quietly, Victoria. Rachel was silent for 3 seconds. Then she confirmed. The signature on the anonymous document matches 80% with her very first grant application back in 2019. It felt like my whole body had dropped into a new layer of ice. Cold, deep, silent. I rushed back to the office, canceled my entire afternoon schedule, called in the legal team, the audit department, and senior HR executives. Everyone was wound tight as a drawn bowstring. But I forced myself to stay calm. In the conference room, the white overhead lights glared against the thick stacks of files. Luis, our head of finance, reported, "We're putting together an evidence package to counter the claims, but the IRS has already sent an urgent verification notice. They're ordering a temporary freeze on all accounts for 48 hours. I heard it, but only one thought pounded in my head. Phoenix will not get its next round of funding. A very calculated blow. No press coverage, no public shaming, just one anonymous letter. At the right time, in the right place. And someone they had just called the face of modern education, was now officially under investigation. I drove home alone. The road felt twice as long. Traffic lights stayed red far too long. The radio played some old, melancholy song. Everything seemed intent on breaking me. That night, I didn't go straight inside. I sat in my car, in the garage, engine off, forehead resting on the steering wheel. It felt like I was back to day one. The day Tyler yelled in my face about my Civic. The day my mother told me I was wasting my life. Only this time, I was truly at risk of losing everything. I stepped out of the car, went into the kitchen, set my phone on the counter. 2 unread messages lit up the screen. From Victoria. "You thought you could cut me off. You're about to learn your lesson." From Mom. "You're making things worse again. Stop before it's too late." I stared at those 2 lines. Didn't blink, didn't tremble, just felt hollow. I went upstairs, turned on my laptop, and typed 2 short lines. "Rachel, start assembling the counter team. We respond within 24 hours. No waiting." I stood up, walked to the window. The night wind blew harder than usual, and I whispered, "Victoria, you don't want peace. You want war. Fine. I won't back down anymore." But deep inside, I still couldn't silence one question. If I keep going, will there be anyone left waiting for me at the end? I couldn't remember how long I'd been sitting there in front of the computer screen. All I knew was that the monitor had gone into sleep mode. And in that pitch-dark room, the only light reflecting off my face, there was a cold, bluish glow. 48 hours of frozen bank accounts, 12 emergency meetings, 3 accusations from the press, and 1 email from the Department of Education suspension of the Phoenix contract. I read every line over and over again. Not a single typo, not a shred of mercy. Cold, clear, final. I locked the screen, walked down to the kitchen, and for the first time in years, I opened the liquor cabinet. A glass of red wine, swirling. I didn't drink it. I just looked at it, like I was looking at myself, appearing full, steady. But one small touch could send me spilling over. I turned on my phone. No new messages. Not a word from colleagues. Not a single note of encouragement from the same people who once called me a modern female leadership icon. Only silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring, that makes your heart scream, but no one hears it. I called Rachel, line busy. I called Luis, no answer. I texted Ethan, my former tech advisor, "Where do you think I went wrong?" No reply. I powered off my phone, leaned my head back. The kitchen light blurred in my eyes, and I cried. No sobbing, no thrashing, just tears, flowing from something inside me that had just broken something I couldn't even name. That's when I thought of Ava, a 12-year-old girl who had once sent me a handwritten letter after receiving a free computer from the Future Minds program. "Dear Ms. Rae, thanks to you, I can learn to code. One day, I'll make games for kids like me in the countryside. I will never forget your kindness. I took that letter out of my desk drawer. My hands are trembling, and I cried for the second time, because I wondered if I am losing the chance for kids like Ava. Just because I've been too busy fighting back against people who never deserved my time, I looked at myself in the mirror. A pale face, hair falling loose in messy strands, eyes empty. I couldn't see the Rae I used to be, not the young woman who once stood and gave a keynote in front of 1,000 people, not the woman who dared to stand alone against her family's prejudice. All I saw was someone tired, lonely, and full of doubt. I had done everything in the name of justice. But if justice didn't bring me peace, how long could I keep believing in it? I sat down on the kitchen floor, not because my legs were tired, but because I no longer had the strength to stand. Memories flashed like a fast-forward reel. Tyler's invisible slap in the parking lot. My mother looked disappointed at the family meeting. The email accuses me of money laundering. Victoria's cold text message. I had fought. I had struck back. I had won. I had returned every stab with wit and strategy. But in the end, I was still just the daughter of a family that would never acknowledge me. And now, I could lose everything. The company, the projects, the reputation. As for my family, they had left me behind long ago. Could I keep living if there were no one left by my side? Would I have the courage to get up again, when even I wasn't sure who I was anymore? I don't remember when I fell asleep on the kitchen floor. When I woke up, my neck was stiff, and my back was sore. It was still dark outside. The only light came from the faint yellow glow of the motion sensor bulbs in the porch, shining through the glass door, casting my shadow long beneath the chair. No new messages, no emails, nothing had changed, or at least, that's what I thought. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. No makeup, no excuses, just me, raw and unfiltered. Swollen eyes, messy hair, a gaze so drained it felt breathless. I asked myself, is this really the person 15,000 kids once called an inspiration? At 9:42 in the morning, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, simply, "You don't deserve this." My heart clenched, not because I was shocked, but because I never thought that anyone would still be on my side right now. I texted back, "Who is this?" 2 minutes later, the reply came, "This is Lucy David Pierce's legal assistant. I resigned this morning." I froze, read it again. "I think you should know Victoria edited a lot of the original documents before submitting the anonymous complaint. It can be proven, but it won't be easy. If you need help, I'm in." I sat there in silence, not because hope had suddenly returned, but because for the first time in days, I didn't feel alone anymore. I called Rachel right after that. The line was open. Her voice was tired but alert. "You know, about Lucy." "Yeah. I'm already working on getting her statement and pulling the metadata from the altered files. If we're lucky, we might be able to turn the IRS case around." I exhaled, not deeply, not strongly, but it was a real breath. That afternoon, I sat in my office in silence. No meetings, no signatures, just quietly placing my hands on the keyboard and retyping the 2 lines I had written when I first founded the company. "If the world has no place for the children who have no voice, I'll build another door." I broke down in tears, not out of helplessness, but because I remembered who I was. I'm not someone who enjoys fighting for dominance. I'm not someone hungry for revenge. I just was forced to fight. And now, I fight not just for my honor, but for kids like Ava, for the Lucys in the shadows, for the people who have stood where I stand now and been crushed in silence. That night, I stepped out onto the porch and turned on the warm yellow light. With a cup of hot tea in my hand, I opened the list of public schools that had requested early access to the upgraded Digital Dynamics 2.0 platform. 32 schools. Even though Phoenix was under investigation, these schools still believed in me. I tapped the screen, saw the name of a school in Ohio, the place where I grew up. I was once the only kid in my 5th grade class without a computer. I didn't need the whole world on my side anymore. I just needed one clear opportunity and one big enough target. Victoria might have dragged me down, but she also revealed one thing: her fear of losing control. And in that fear, there's always a crack. I set my tea down, switched on my office light, and whispered, "I won't die at your hands. I'll live, so you'll have to watch yourself fall apart." If you've ever been pushed to rock bottom just for staying true to your values, stand with me, subscribe to Revenge. Mark, don't miss the moment I start my comeback. I started with a blank sheet of paper, no computer, no spreadsheet, no planning software, just me, a pen, and the steady ticking from the wall clock. The only thing in this house that hasn't betrayed me. In the middle of the page, I wrote, "The final plan, not for revenge, but for liberation." 3 steps, clear, leaving no room for mistakes. Step 1, legal strike. I gave full authority to Rachel and the internal investigation team to handle every single file that Victoria had tampered with illegally. Lucy, after officially signing her cooperation agreement, provided 3 original copies, still scattered across David's old Google Drive. Each file had a timestamp. Each edit matched the exact moment Victoria accessed it. Too perfect to be called a coincidence. We prepared a counterclaim. This time, not just to protect my reputation, but to pull Victoria into a legal spiral she had never faced before. Step 2, media transfer. I organized a closed-door meeting with 6 universities and educational organizations that still stood by me despite the ongoing investigation. I told them everything, no circling around, no sugarcoating, just the truth and the data and trust. They fell silent. Then they began to nod. One university president placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "We're not investing in a company. We're betting on a person, and you're still that person." I left the room with a new memorandum in hand, an independent academic alliance, completely outside the financial systems, relying only on data and real results to evaluate my company. They agreed to publicly release a performance report on digital learning dynamics from its very first year until now. The press can spin stories, politics can sway, but real results don't lie. Step 3, cut them off completely. I called the bank. I closed all secondary accounts, which are still under my mother's name, removed Tyler's access to the group health insurance system, shut down the private scholarship fund I had set up under Victoria's name. No warning, no explanation. I didn't do this out of anger. I did it because it was time to put a period at the end of a chapter that had nothing worth keeping. That night, I turned on the office lights. Outside, the wind rattled against the glass, and I felt that something in me had shifted. No more Rae trembling under attack. No more Rae forcing herself to prove her worth. Now, I knew what I needed. I knew what I had. And I knew who no longer had the right to step into the safe space I was rebuilding. I powered on my computer, typed a short message to all my employees. We will not back down. We will not stay silent. We will not let what we've built fall to the lies of others. 3 lines, sent, no edits. I looked at the clock, 11:47 p.m. Tomorrow, Victoria would receive the lawsuit. The IRS would get the independent auditor's comparison report, and my company will start a new week in a different light. I shut down my computer, pulled the office keys from the drawer, stepped out into the hallway. No applause, no camera flashes, just me standing alone, after the final plan. But I didn't need anyone besides me to know I was heading the right way. All I needed was for these legs to keep moving forward. I was in the conference room on the 7th floor when my assistant walked in and whispered softly, "Ms. Victoria Monroe is at the reception desk. She says she doesn't have an appointment, but she refuses to leave." I lifted my head from the stack of files. At that moment, no one in the room had moved. Even Rachel stopped typing on her laptop. It was as if everyone understood the hour had come. I nodded. My expression remains unchanged. I simply stood up and carefully gathered each sheet of paper in front of me. Send her up, alone. 5 minutes later, the door opened. Victoria walked in. Lightly curled hair, beige bodycon dress, high heels, still the perfect replica of confidence at first glance. But her eyes this time, there was something uncertain. She sat down across from me without being invited, and I didn't need to invite her. No water, no greetings, no small talk. We sat like two warriors who had discarded all formalities and were left with nothing but bare swords. "What do you want from me, Rae?" I raised my head, looking straight at her. "Justice and the truth." Victoria gave a dry laugh. "The truth or victory? Your name is all over the news. What more glory do you want?" I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm. "I don't need glory. I need to make sure no one else has to go through what you just did to me." She narrowed her eyes. "And what about me? 10 years living in the shadow of perfect Rae. I never had anything that was truly mine. I opened a store, you funded it. I launched a collection in which the press talked about you. I showed up somewhere people asked, 'Are you related to Rae Williams?'" Her voice began to catch, but I didn't interrupt. Because for the first time, I was hearing something Victoria had never said before. "I was jealous of you, yes. But not for the money, not for the company. Because you were always seen as the good one. Even when you quietly cut me out of the system, you were still calm, moral, and gracious. And me, I just needed one mistake, and I'd forever be branded the troublemaker." I said nothing. My chest ached not from anger, but because I suddenly realized she didn't just want to destroy me. She wanted to be seen. I took a deep breath. "Then instead of attacking me, why didn't you just say from the start that you were hurt?" Victoria stayed silent. After a moment, her voice broke. "Because I knew you wouldn't believe me. You're always strong, always composed. I was afraid I wasn't enough for you to listen." The room fell heavy. A silence longer than any meeting I had ever sat through. I stood. I didn't walk over. I didn't extend my hand. I simply said, "I will not withdraw the lawsuit. What breaks the law must face the consequences. But if you want to talk, as two people who once called each other sisters, I'm willing to listen." Later, Victoria tightened her grip on her purse strap. She stood, gave a faint nod. "I understand." She walked out, never looked back. I turned to face the glass windows. The highway lights were beginning to switch on. The pale gold of the evening spilled across the conference table, draping over the stack of complaint files. I picked them up, folded them, placed them back down. I did not forgive, but I no longer let resentment lead the way. Tomorrow would be the hearing, the big table, the rows of legal seats, the public eye, but the real battle had just ended in silence. The question was that silence the end? Or just the pause before the final explosion? Tuesday, 9 o'clock in the morning. Federal hearing room. High ceiling, dark wood-paneled walls, the kind of space where even the faintest footsteps echo back like hammer blows straight to the chest. I sat in the middle row of the witness bench. In front of me are 3 commissioners. Beside me, Rachel. And across from us, Victoria. She wore a black blazer, crisp white shirt, and red lipstick. Her expression was calm, but her hands beneath the table trembled ever so slightly. They called me to speak first. I rose to my feet. No papers, no script to read from. I looked directly at the 3 people before me. "My name is Rae Williams, CEO of Digital Learning Dynamics. I'm not here to save my personal image. I'm here to protect an educational system that serves more than 15,000 students and hundreds of teachers across the United States." I paused, steady. "Someone fabricated claims that we laundered money through our partner charities. I'm here to present the evidence and let the data speak for itself." Rachel brought the documents forward. Original files displayed, timestamps, metadata, Lucy had recovered. With each frame projected, I saw Victoria shrink just a little more. No one in the room spoke, only the soft click of the slide changer and the slow, steady rhythm of my heartbeat. When it was her turn to respond, Victoria stood. I admit, I filed the complaint, but my motive wasn't malicious. I was suspicious. I felt pushed out, erased from the roles I once held in this organization. The commissioner in the center raised his head. Ms. Monroe, are you saying your actions were driven by personal feelings, not legal grounds? Victoria stayed silent. I didn't take my eyes off her. Ms. Monroe, are you aware that the altered documents were found in the account you used? I didn't think others could have accessed it. A slow shake of the head from the female commissioner on the left. You were the only person logged in 3 times during the exact period those files were changed. Victoria faltered. It was plain to see. I felt no triumph, no sense of winning, only fatigue, because I knew the truth wouldn't bring me relief. It would only close a door that needed to be closed. By the end of the hearing, the presiding chair delivered the final statement. We recommend no prosecution for CEO Williams. However, due to the internal misconduct involved, we will refer the matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for an independent investigation into the complaint. A soft hiss rippled through the room. Someone exhaled. I simply closed my eyes. I did not smile. Outside the courthouse, sunlight struck me square in the eyes. Victoria lingered on the stone walkway. Not leaving yet. I walked toward her. She looked at me. You won, she said. I shook my head. No one wins. We only choose to lose less. She nodded, a faint, sad smile tugging at her lips. If you let the prosecutors take this, I could be formally charged. Couldn't I? I looked away. That's no longer my decision. She stood there a moment longer, then walked off. No one saw her off. No one waited. I turned away, too. But inside, the ache cut deeper than the betrayal itself. That night, I came home and washed my face in front of the mirror. No makeup, no armor, no fight, just a woman who had given up far too much to keep one thing intact, herself. And yet, a question lingered, refusing to let go. If I don't forgive, am I really any different from them? 3 days after the hearing, everything was strangely quiet. No new lawsuits, no newspaper screaming bold headlines, no press conferences, no cameras, just peace. And sometimes, that very peace is what makes me feel the most uneasy. I sat in my office, watching the numbers run across the dashboard. Phoenix had been reopened. The next round of funding was pending approval. User engagement was up 11%. The education program in Texas had just expanded to 8 new counties. Everything should have made me happy, but all I felt was emptiness. That evening, I came home, opened the front door, and saw a cardboard box sitting on the coffee table. No one had told me. No one had texted. I opened it. Inside were old photographs, family. I, at 13, was wearing a worn-out shirt, holding Victoria after Mom had just scolded her to tears. A small piece of paper was tucked between the photos. I can't keep these anymore, but I can't bring myself to throw them away. If you don't want them, just burn them. Victoria's handwriting, no signature, no extra words. That was it. I sat down on the couch. The photo trembled in my hand, not from the cold, but because my heart had suddenly softened in a way I didn't expect. I had dragged her into court. I had stood before everyone, exposing every single mistake she made. I had been merciless, and now she sent me a box of memories. No anger, no pleading, just giving back something that had never been spoken aloud. I held the photo, sitting there in silence. Part of me whispered, I could have saved her sooner, before everything shattered so badly. There was nothing left of anyone. The next morning, I woke up early. I walked around the neighborhood, something I hadn't done in 8 months. No earbuds, no phone calls, just the sound of birds, the crunch of dry leaves beneath my feet, and my own breathing. I stopped by my old coffee shop. The barista recognized me and smiled softly. "Haven't seen you in a while. You look better." I nodded, smiling back. "Thanks." Barely more than a breath. When I got home, there was mail in the box. An envelope from the Department of Education, confirming that Digital Learning Dynamics had met the special requirements to become a national provider. I stared at the bold words, "National Accreditation, 11 years." From a tiny room in Millbrook to national reach, I should have cried tears of joy. But the only tear that fell was for something else. I had no one to hug when the good news arrived. No mother, no brother, no Victoria, not a single pair of arms, just me and an empty chair. That night, I opened the garage. The old Civic still sat there in silence. I walked up to it, ran my hand along the door handle. A scratch was still there, the one Tyler once called a disgrace to the whole family. I slid into the driver's seat, didn't start the engine, just sat there, closed my eyes. I had gotten my revenge. I had protected myself. I had preserved my dignity, but I had traded away warmth, trust, and a part of myself, the part that once believed people could love me without conditions. Maybe one day, I'll forgive, not because they deserve it, but because I need the weight to lift off my heart. But tonight, I'll just allow myself to be sad. So, have I really won? Or am I simply the last one left standing, when everything else has already fallen? 6 weeks after receiving the nationwide recognition decision, I moved out of Millbrook. No one knew. There was no farewell gathering, no thank you post, just one Saturday morning. I slipped the keys to my old house into a drawer, taped a small note on top, "Thank you for sheltering me long enough." I moved to a small coastal town, nearly a 4-hour drive from the city. A place with no name that anyone would recognize. A place no one could find. And for the first time in many years, I didn't bring a single business card with me. I rented a small wooden house with a red roof and a backyard full of lavender. Every morning, I walked down to the beach, not to meditate, not to find inspiration, just to walk. I still ran the company remotely, but only 3 days a week. No more back-to-back meetings. No more checking emails at midnight. Digital Learning Dynamics kept growing. Phoenix kept expanding. But I no longer ran ahead of it. I let it go, moving in the right direction, guided by good people. One afternoon, a package arrived. From my mother. Inside was a handwritten letter. Her handwriting is no longer steady. "I'm not saying you were right or wrong, but I know I was wrong not to believe in you. I once thought silence was preserving peace, but perhaps it was that very silence that made you lose yourself. If one day you ever want to, I'm still here. No demands, no conditions." I read every line, feeling my stomach hollow out. Yet there was no pain anymore, only lightness. I didn't text back. I didn't call. I folded the letter and placed it in the bookshelf. Not to forget, but to remember, some things only need to be read, and they don't necessarily need to be answered. I spent the rest of that month teaching a digital skills class for middle-aged women at the community library. One evening, Jane, 62, hesitantly asked me how to open an email account. As I guided her fingers over each key, she looked at me and smiled faintly. "You have such peaceful eyes. I bet when you were younger, you used to run a lot." I smiled back, so much that I didn't realize who I was running past. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was longer, my face wore less makeup, my eyes were no longer sharp, but somehow steadier than steel. I whispered to myself, "Rae, you survived, not because you won, but because you knew when to let go." I no longer needed Victoria's apology. I didn't need my mother's acknowledgement. I didn't need the public's applause. All I needed was to wake up every morning and see the sunlight filter through the curtains, and every evening make a pot of tea without bracing myself for the phone to buzz with another crisis. One day, I drove back to Millbrook without telling anyone. I stopped in front of my old house. The door was closed, the yard clean, the sound of children inside. I didn't knock. I just stood there, resting my hand lightly on the white wooden fence, and whispered, "Thank you for holding a piece of me, the old version." Then I turned around and drove away. I no longer live for recognition. I live so I don't betray myself. In the end, I realized forgiveness isn't words. It's when I can speak of someone without speaking from the wound anymore. Rae Williams, once seen as the humble shadow of a family basking in the spotlight, stood up, returned every knife, kept herself intact, and learned how to keep walking without anyone beside her. If you've stayed with me to this point, maybe you, too, are on a journey to rise from something. And if you are, just keep going, one step, one beat. You'll reach the place where you don't have to win and still feel enough. Thank you for walking this road with me. Not everyone has the patience to follow a revenge story, only to see it turn into a healing journey. If you've ever suffered in silence, been dismissed, or carried the weight of being in a family that doesn't listen, I hope you found a piece of yourself in Rae. And if there's still something sitting in your heart right now, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment and share the part that struck you the deepest. Share this story with someone who needs a reason to stand back up. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Mark, where every journey is told with emotion, with truth, and with a voice that no one is allowed to silence.